Hi everybody, FIDE Master Dennis Monokroussos here, and a friend of mine recently sent me an interview, or maybe it was an online chat, whatever it was, with Francisco Vallejo Pons, the strong Spanish Grandmaster, the strongest native-born Spanish Grandmaster. I mean, he's not as good as Shirov was, or at least when Shirov's in his prime, but Shirov, of course, is an import. Nothing wrong with that, but as far as native-born Spanish players go, I'm pretty sure that Vallejo Pons is the strongest Spanish Grandmaster of all time, probably by a pretty large margin. So anyway, my friend, as I said, sent me this online chat / interview with him, and he mentioned a couple of his games that he really liked. In particular, I'm going to look at two of the games that he mentioned, the two games that he mentioned in a kind of a context of tactics and attacking. So both of these are really neat, and probably you're not likely to have seen the first one at all. The second one you might have seen if you go back a ways and follow Najdorf theory. But they're both really very impressive, and I think they'll make for a nice exercise too. So this first game is against Robert Kuczynski, played in the Bundesliga back in 2003. Vallejo had white, and we'll just kind of zip ahead here to get to the crucial moment. Just to explain this knight h3 thing, of course it doesn't block the fianchetto, but it's also especially effective if black goes for a stonewall formation, because the knight then goes, so stonewall is when this guy comes here. Of course, with the pawn on g6, you're not going to stonewall it, but still. Anyway, the knight comes to f4, sometimes to d3, and then e5. This guy comes here and here, and white gets this super fantastic grip on a bunch of dark squares. So that's one of the ideas, and in general, for the knight to go to f4, whether there's a pawn sitting on d5 or not. For one thing, if the pawn's on d6, there's the idea of knight f4, d5, and then taking over e6, or at least hoping to. Anyway, c6, knight f4, d6, knight c3, bishop g7, h4, not forced. I believe d5 is the main move here. Again, with the aforementioned plan in mind of eventually, not right away, but eventually, perhaps dropping a knight on e6, and of course, directly the point is to prevent black from playing e5, or at least not to let him do so without making a concession. Alright, but this isn't about opening theory. Just thought I would explain one little thing for you. Alright, so we'll start here very briefly, and even this moment is a little bit interesting. So white's played h4, and okay, that made sense. It clamped on the g5 square, but then he played h5. And there you might think, well, he's trying to, in some way, undermine the black king side, undermine the structure there. But now he plays h6, and all right, is it really that great? Okay, it does drive the bishop off the long diagonal for now, but isn't the pawn on h6 a little bit weak? And what is white going to do? I mean, there aren't really a lot of open lines here, so it's an interesting move. It does freeze the black king side pawn structure in place, and we'll see the idea of that in a moment. So after bishop to f8, what does white want to do now? What's the big plan at this point? I mean, the knights look like they're restricted. The bishop on g2 is restricted. The bishop on c1 could go to e3. Doesn't look that inspiring. Maybe to play b3. Maybe b3, bishop b2 would make some sense. Although then you have to worry about something like b3, bishop to b4, and if bishop to b2, then black plays g5, followed by knight to d5, which might be embarrassing. So maybe b3 is not great, or at least you'd have to meet bishop to b4 with bishop to d2. So what does white do here? What's his big idea with h6? The answer comes now. Knight to h3. So this makes really good sense. In some cases, he might play knight to g5. Pretty decent outpost for the knight. Or he could just clear room for the bishop to come to g5, and then drop the knight on f4. So there are various configurations that are available to the bishop from c1 and the knight on h3. And in all these cases, it looks pretty decent. All right, so black played bishop to d6, simple developing move, bishop to e3. And this at least kind of suggests he wants to play bishop to d4 and grab this diagonal. Of course, it also prepares for him to castle. Anyway, black played knight to g4, so not letting the bishop sit there, and it moves on to g5. If he had went to d4, then bishop to e5 looks like a pretty adequate rejoinder to me. So he went to g5. Knight to d7, castles, bishop c5, rook h to f1, and now black played knight to h2. which is at least kind of an implicit draw offer. If the rook runs away, then the black knight will go back to g4 and ask Vallejo, well, what now? What's your big idea, pal? All right, well, Vallejo did have a good idea here, a very interesting idea. See if you can figure out what it is. So where, if anywhere, should the rook go? What ought white to do if he wants to avoid this horrible fate of a quick draw against a lower-rated player? Not that Kosinski's a bad player. He's 2490, but Vallejo is 2635 and an up-and-comer. I mean, now he's a 2700. Very good player and an ambitious player. Plus, it's a team match too, so you can't just throw away a white like that. You gotta fight. Gotta prove something. But how? The answer: knight a4. Really cool idea. So if the bishop goes back to b6, then Vallejo would just chop it off and play rook to h1, and then there's no perpetual. White has the bishop pair, and will sooner or later open up the board with f3. All right, let me show you that, I guess, instead of just blathering about it. So knight b6. Okay, let's say ab, rook h1, knight g4, and you do something with this guy. Do I want to play king to b1 or a3? I don't know. Doesn't really matter a lot. Probably. I don't think it matters if we make a move, but we'll just play king to b1 just to make a non-committal move. Anyway, as I said, white's idea is to fairly soon play f3, break open the center, and the black king can end up in some trouble. White's pieces are all quite active. They're not too far away from the king. The pawn on h6 helps to restrict the black king's freedom of movement. So this would be a very nice position for white. But the obvious question, well, why not just take the rook? Free food. Well, here's the continuation of the plan. Rook takes d7, bishop d7, knight c5. And white is down 2 exchanges at the moment. However, he's threatening 2 pieces. So it's going to be 3 pieces for 2 rooks. Or, in this case, 2 rooks and a pawn. Now, as a rule of thumb, though, minor pieces are often dominant over rooks. And that's certainly the case here. I mean, there aren't an awful lot of open files. The white minor pieces are really active. They are all either on good squares or can very easily reach good squares. So, maybe a computer can defend like a genius and hold black's position, but for human beings, it's a thankless task. All right, Kosinski played bishop to c8, preparing b6, but of course going backwards. So bishop to h4 is kind of neat, preparing knight to g5 check. Here, a really amazing line. Black played b6, which is a perfectly decent move, but rook to e8 looks like an even more logical try. So this clears g8 so the king can run home, and it just tries to get the piece into play. So after rook to e8, white can play e3, b6, knight check, king g8, and now where should the white knight retreat from c5? Where should he go? He's on a really good square right now. It's kind of a shame to retreat, but sometimes a man's got to do what a man's got to do. What's the answer? The answer is not to retreat. Who cares about retreating? Bishop to f1. Fantastic. So b takes c5, bishop check. Okay, if bishop to e6, bishop takes e6 is great. So king h8. Not king f8, by the way, because of this rather stylish mate. So king h8, and now white can give perpetual, yes, or we could play knight f7, knight d6, but if he does that and then takes on e8, he's simply down the exchange in the pawn, and won't have any, he might have some drawing chances, but definitely no chances to win. So the idea here is to play g4, fg, bishop e1, and it's all over. Bishop to c3 is coming, it's mating. Thanks for playing, nice knowing you. See you next game. I guess black could play rook to d8 and then rook to d4, but I don't even see how he avoids the mate after that. So probably he has to play bishop to e6 and just throw away the bishop and then the rook with a dead lost position. So that was Vallejo's idea, I believe, after rook to e8. Instead, Kosinski played b6 straight away, knight g5 check, king e8, and now where should we move the knight? So this time there's no e3, bishop f1, bishop c4 business, so we do need a different idea. The knight will honestly move this time, but where to? E6 would be a very natural square, but if black plays king to d7, or maybe trades and plays king to d7, it's not clear what the knight exactly is doing. It's going to have to just jump back out. So Vallejo found a better plan for this knight. So he played knight to d3, and the idea is to plunk it on e5. All right, here for instance, if rook to b8, which is probably the best move, then knight e5, rook b7, knight c6, and black still has this really minor, almost trivial material advantage, but clearly in a practical context, white is much better. But maybe black can still survive this. In the game, Kuczynski played king to d7, knight check, king c7. So he's trying to just get out of the way. But the white pieces are a rather ferocious crew, and the attack continues. So he plays g4, preparing to put the bishop on g3, and also undermining the black kingside structure. Here, black should have played b5 to give his king a little more flight square, a little more room to run, another flight square, and keeping the kingside situation intact. Instead, he played f4, and now, this does stop bishop to g3, but he gets eaten alive by the white minor pieces. So bishop takes e4, threatening to take on c6, bishop d7, knight g to f7, hitting the rook, and now he thought f4 did something, but bishop to g5, the pawn's dropping anyway, it doesn't matter. Now, black does have bishop takes g4, and this is what happened, but white simply ignores and continues with his plan. Bishop takes f4, and now he threatens knight takes g4 with check. Okay, Kuczynski played bishop to e2, and now bishop takes c6. And black played rook takes e5 and resigned. Good time to resign because white plays bishop takes a8, and next move he takes on e5. Well, if black plays king to b8, then white can save the bishop on a8 first, and then take on e5. So white is going to be two pieces ahead for nothing, and again, it's quite appropriate that black resigned here. So a really spectacular combination. It's two parts of it. So this knight a4 idea first, giving up the two exchanges, although getting one piece back for a pawn, and then this further line where black plays rook to e8 instead of b6 is in the game, and then very slickly giving up the knight to set up this mating battery, again with the fantastic g4 move. So very, very nice. All right, let's take a look at the second game. And if you thought Vallejo was picking on someone who was a bit below his size, well, this game he goes a bit over his head. So he's black against none other than Peter Svidler, the winner of the recent World Cup, and already at this point one of the world's elite. This is back in 2004. Svidler was 2747, so roughly in the same area he always is. Mid 2700s, and Vallejo was 2663 at the time. All right, so we have a mainline English attack Najdorf, stuff that's occurred in thousands of games. And all of this is well known too. May not be well known to you. I apologize for going fast, but if we jump into the theory of this line, we'll never end. Maybe, I don't know if I covered this exact sub variation, but I covered certainly at least this position in my old series on the quick Sicilian and the quick Najdorf. So you can probably find it if you hunt into the archives. But I'm going to start talking about it from here. So this position has become more popular since this game. There were a few games prior to this game, which is from the Amber tournament in 2004, where it arose. And I think in the earlier games, white played knight takes f4. Svidler played bishop takes f4. And as I said, this occurred in some other games that year, but I think this is probably the first game where this arose. And certainly knight c5 was played for the first time that year. Now, nowadays queen to e3 is the main move in this position when it arises, which isn't that often. It's a bit of a sideline, but queen to e3 is the best try for white, it seems. Svidler played bishop to g2, which certainly makes sense as well, intimating at the possibility of e5, pressuring d6 and discovering an attack on the rook in the corner. So here, what should black do about this threat? So we'll turn this into a little attacking exercise. Black to move, what do you do? The b4 pawn is hanging, the rook is loose, So you put those together and rook to b8 becomes a pretty obvious candidate, although e5 might still be played then, or maybe knight to d4 with the idea of knight to c6. So rook to b8 certainly makes sense. What else? Well, how about b3? This is in fact what happened. So this kind of takes precedence over any e5 business. Black is immediately trying to rip open the white position. Swidler responds in the standard way whenever you see this kind of attack from either white or black. So let's say white has a pawn on h5 and plays g6. Very often the same kind of rejoinder will ensue. C takes b3 and then a3. Okay, so now what should black do? How does he make progress from here? It's not going to be rook takes a3, so it's not like a combination book where you immediately, whenever I ask a question, you look, how can I sacrifice the biggest quantity of material? So it's not quite that frisky. Let's say we're still in a somewhat of a building phase. All right, the move that was played by Vallejo was, I think, quite a correct one and a very logical one. d5. This has two primary purposes. One is that if white were to take on d5, which has never been played, black gets this diagonal, which is a very powerful weapon. And we'll look at this in a moment. The other idea is that potentially the bishop on e7 can participate in sacrificial threats against the a3 pawn. And you put these two ideas together, e takes d5, bishop f5 check, and then looking to blast through on a3, you've got the makings of quite promising attack. So let's see what would happen on e takes d5. Bishop to f5 check, king a1. No immediate winners, but knight to d6 is a very good move, and it's a very good multifunctional move. So first of all, it stops any d6 ideas with the idea of grabbing the rook. That's first. Secondly, of course, it blockades the passed pawn in general. So it's not just the threat to the rook on a8, but we don't want to let this passed pawn get anywhere either. And then a third point is that once the knight's on d6, well, naturally, we might go further and jump into c4 with ideas like knight c4, queen moves, rook takes b3, b takes a3, and then b2 check, supported by the knight, king moves, and then b1 queen is checkmate. So that's a very, very powerful threat, or very serious threat, and one that white must immediately attend to. So he does. He does. In this variation, he does. This isn't the game. Queen to b4. Okay, and now what should black do? And this is a combinational idea we're going to see a couple more times as we go through the game. So if you can solve it the first time, big ups to you, big props. Actually, the later examples are a little more intricate in certain respects, but it's still the same general concept. Well, black really wants to break through on a3. He can't do it now, but if the knight's on c4, he can. So the solution is to play rook a4. We don't need the knight on c5. Queen c5, knight c4. And this comes with tempo, and now, boy, is it trouble for white, because we're threatening a3 with the rook, with the knight, although we want the knight really to support b2, and with the bishop as well. All right, let's say, whoops, did not mean to do that. Let's say white plays d6. What should black do at this point? So this looks like he's kind of cobbled the defense together, but he hasn't. But how do we prove it? How does black finish the job? The answer is to go forward. Rook takes a3. Of course, b takes a3 is mate in 2. So in case you haven't seen this idea yet, that's the point. But queen takes a3, and at least for the moment, it looks as if white's going to have a fair amount of material. The problem, though, is that his king is still in desperate danger. If he plays d takes e7, for example, then you just play knight to c2 check, king to b1, and not sure what the best is, if there's any super fantastic discovery. There probably is. I mean, it looks like just any discovery, really, as long as you don't go to the A file, will just win. So, knight to b4 check, yeah. If bishop b4, you just take it, it gets nowhere. So knight to d3 is forced, because if king to a1, I mean, this is the basic idea. Queen a5, knight a2, and you take with checkmate. So knight to d3, bishop takes, king to c1, and all right. I mean, it looks like you just, well, queen c8, knight c3. You can maybe play knight a2. I don't know. I mean, if nothing else, you just play queen e7 with big material advantage. Well, not that big, but it's getting bigger. And black is material ahead. The white king is in desperate trouble, so this is clearly winning. And maybe there's something even better than what I just showed you, but that's certainly good enough. B takes a3 is maybe a more resilient try. On this, play queen to a5. Threatening queen takes a3 with mate next move. If king to b2, now what? Rook c8. So we just threaten rook to c2. And if knight to d4, to stop that, then queen to c3 is mate. I suppose you could try rook to d2 as well. Okay, how do we bust this one? This one I'm not quite sure about just yet. I think we just play bishop takes d6. Because if bishop takes d6, then queen takes d2, and that's lights out. And if rook takes d6, then, well, actually, maybe I'm mistaken about this. I don't think I am, though, but maybe. All right, so king b3, queen b5 is mate. If king a1, then b2 check, and then b takes c1 is, well, we'll have an appropriate discovery one way or another, which should be decisive. And if king to b1, then we just start collecting things with discoveries. Rook takes e2 looks like a good start. And we don't have to worry about rook to d8 mate, because our queen is in the neighborhood. So all of this is winning. All right, so that's what happens on king to b2. So a4. On this, again, rook to c8 is the right move. So we cut off the exits before the king runs away. Rook to d4 to protect the pawn. And now queen c5, threatening queen a3 mate. So king b2, and now check, and now b2. So we just leave that bishop on e7 and pre forever. It doesn't matter. All right, b1 queen is a big threat, among other things. So knight to b3, and now finally we'll save it. Bishop to f8, and next we'll promote, or we'll play bishop to e6, and white falls apart. So materially, white is still ahead, but he won't be for more than another couple of moves. And his king is, of course, in dire straits. Not the band, but the situation. All right, so back to this position here. E takes d5. We just saw why it's never been played, and the move that was chosen by Svidler is perfectly good. Knight to d4. Blockading, and perhaps he's going to play knight to c6. And, of course, he'd like to keep some pressure on the b3 pawn and preferably eradicate it. All right, knight to d6 was the response, aiming to jump into to c4. And here, white can try various moves. Knight takes e6 is, in fact, not so bad, which, for one reason, it gives him sometimes the possibility of playing e takes d5 or e5, and he doesn't have to throw out bishop to f5 check, so that's out. Another reasonable move is bishop takes d6, getting rid of that knight before it jumps into c4. And even the move Svidler played is perfectly fine. E takes d5, and now we see one of the points of knight to d4, or a further point. It takes away bishop to f5 check. All right, black played bishop to g4, saving his bishop with the tempo. And here too, white has several pretty decent moves to choose between. So there's knight to c6, putting the knight on a nice outpost, and also, of course, hitting the bishop on e7. Another interesting move is queen to b4, willing to sacrifice the exchange, but again, taking over some important queenside squares, trying to stop knight to c4 ideas, hitting the knight on c5. It's playable too. Svidler played the natural move rook d to e1, which threatens knight to c6, which would win the bishop on e7. Okay, here knight to c4 is playable, but Vallejo's move was good too. He played queen to d7, which gets out of the fork in advance. There's knight to c6 won't come with a hit on the queen, and it also prepares bishop to f5 check. So again, black would very much love to seize that powerful diagonal. Now, here it seems Svidler lost the game. I mean, it's a difficult position to play, but it may still be tenable. So two moves that are worth considering are queen to c3 and rook takes e7. In the game he played queen to b4, and this looks, again, like a natural move. We've seen it before, but it seems to be losing, and you might want to try to figure out how black to move wins from here. So it's a bit of work, but give it your best shot. Stop the recording, take 15 minutes, and try to work everything out as far as you can. Maybe do the old Kotov thing and write down all the variations you see, and then test them by what I show you, and maybe run the engine later and see how it fares. Okay, well, here's what happened. First, bishop to f5 check, which shouldn't be a surprise. Now, white can choose between taking the bishop and playing king to a1. In the game, Svidler played king to a1, so let's look at the other move first. Knight f5, queen f5 check, king a1, and alright, once again, it's a good place to stop and figure out how black should proceed with this attack from this point. Well, the answer is that black will use a combinational scheme that's similar to what we saw before. Start with rook f to b8, and if the queen runs away, there's rook takes a3 check followed by b2. So queen takes c5 is more or less forced, and now knight c4, crushing. So the queen is under a threat. It doesn't matter that white can take on e7, either of two ways, or capture on c4. The bottom line is that black is going to take something, or take with something on a3, and white's position will disintegrate pretty rapidly. So for instance, if queen takes e7, knight a3, and it's lights out. The threat's knight to c2. Well, actually the threat is, knight c2 is the easiest. King to b1, rook a1 mate. If queen takes a3, then rook a3, b2, b1 queen, checkmate. So a better defense here is bishop to e4, trying to make sure that the white king has b1 as a flight square. But now, knight takes a3 anyway. White can't take the queen. Hopefully you all see why. Knight c2 double check, and rook a1 mate. But knight takes b3 at least stops the immediate disasters, gets rid of that nasty pawn, and white is, after all, a piece and a pawn ahead at the moment. Though there's so much material it's hanging, it's not clear just exactly where this is going to land. All right, from here, black would play queen takes f4, threatening various discoveries, and of course threatening the queen. White's best is d6, bishop d6, and now queen is c1. All right, from here, the point of d6 is that the rook on a8 is hanging, so black should simply play rook to a7 and preserve it, and threaten to play rook takes b3. So white needs to trade queens here. Okay, rook to d1, again with a little back rank stuff, g6. Now, white doesn't want to play, or can't play b takes a3 because rook b3 and the threat of rook a takes a3 mate decides. So rook to d3 is the best that white can do, but now black wins with another little combination. Knight c4 check, rook takes b3, knight d2 check, and knight takes e4, with two pieces for rook, which is almost always going to be a decisive advantage, and it is here too. The one thing that needs to be checked really quickly is rook to b4, trying to skewer the pieces, but black plays rook to c7 check, and wherever the king goes, there's going to be a satisfactory check by the knight. In fact, white's king is even in some trouble here. So the bottom line is that black is enjoying a winning advantage at this point. But nevertheless, I think knight takes f5 would have been the most resilient defense. Instead, Svidler played king to a1 and goes down rapidly in a blaze of glory. What's the winning procedure? Well, I hope you all get it this time because it's the same thing we just saw. Again, rook f to b8, queen c5, knight c4. So very familiar idea. If queen takes c4, then you sack the rook, and you promote and give checkmate. So back here, Svidler played d6 instead, trying to keep as much guard over a3 as he can, but it's not enough. Rook takes a3 check. And again, if b takes a3, b2 followed by b1 queen is checkmate. So queen takes a3, knight a3, d takes e7. Materially, white is in good shape. He's got a rook and two pieces for the queen, and he's threatening to take on a3 in some cases, not here. He's threatening to take the pawn on b3. He's threatening to play e8 queen and liquidate some of the material. And as I said, I think I said, maybe I didn't, to play knight takes f5. So practically the entire black army is exchangeable at least, and half of it's en pris, it seems. And the rook on b8 is hanging to the bishop on f4. So pretty much the entire black army is hanging, but as Mikhail Tal famously said many years ago, they can only take them one at a time. So Vallejo plays knight to c2 check. All right, if the king goes to b1, then knight takes e1 is a big discovered check with a quick mate, but also now with a big material advantage as well. So knight takes c2, and now, how do we finish? Probably not with bishop takes c2. I think in that case, maybe white promotes and sacks the pawn, and maybe plays knight takes b3. I think he can escape there, but even if he can't, there's a much more efficient way for black to win. So Vallejo played queen to a4 check, and here's Fiedler resigned. On account of, you guessed it, knight a3, queen a3 check. So this time it's the queen who gives herself up. Actually, the queen gave herself up in some other lines too, but usually it was the rook. And once again, we've got this checkmate. So a very nice game by Vallejo. Of course, a lot of it was built off the same concept that we got to see in several different variations, but still really impressive. And I mean, just look at a position like this. I mean, it's quite spectacular. First of all, to foresee a position like this and to realize that even though you're down material and practically the entire army is hanging, you still have a win with this little in-between move. And by the way, it's worth kind of counting up the material situation here, right? I mean, of course, black is mating in two moves and making a queen, but just at the moment, I mean, if it's white's move, king to b2, and white is up a rook and two pieces. Not to mention, well, that he has e8 queen. So it's a pretty nice game. Pretty nice to sacrifice so much material to break through and win, especially with black against one of the world's best players. So very impressive game, and I have to say, I mean, this is fairly typical of Vallejo's style. I mean, he's not always quite so successful against the world's elite, but he's a very aggressive player, and he has had some really fantastic results against great players. I think he has a plus score, for instance, against Topalov, and while I think Kramnik has a very good score against him overall, I remember he really applied a savage beating to Kramnik in the mid-2000s. And that was a period when Kramnik was kind of ill. I mean, he was playing not great chess in general, but it was still a very impressive game in the Lowenthal Sicilian. So you might want to check that game out. I mean, it's rare that you'll see Kramnik lose so badly and with white, even during that period when he wasn't playing that well. So Vallejo is definitely a very exciting player. Again, maybe he's not quite in that the very top elite, but he's a dangerous guy and very entertaining. So hope you enjoyed this and got a good workout out of it. I'll see you next time. Take care. Bye-bye.